A list of sensitive themes and topics included in this episode can be found in the episode description. Welcome to This Guy Sucked, the show where we prove that it's never too late to have haters and you can't libel the dead. I'm your host, Dr. Claire Aubin, and I'm a historian, writer, and, most importantly, certified hater. On this show, as you hopefully all know by now, unless you're new here, in which case welcome, we talk about people from throughout history with legacies that need a little updating. Whether it's because of their politics, their behavior, or their impact on society and culture, these guys actually kind of sucked. And we bring in a new scholar every week to tell us why. With me today, once again, is fan favorite guest Roel Konijnendijk, who is a historian of classical Greek warfare and military thought and a Darby Fellow. I wrote fellow with an E on the end of it in a very sort of old Englishy way.
A Darby Fellow.
The Darby Fellow.
It must be intoned in this manner.
In ancient history at Lincoln College at Oxford. He's also the moderator of the wildly popular Ask Historians Reddit and famously the internet's ditch guy. Is there anything else I'm missing?
I think that's it. I'm very glad to add more as I go.
We always start with some sort of questions or patter or whatever, but I was going to ask you about the Odyssey, but I discovered in the pre-show chat, which we just had for a long time, you haven't seen it yet.
I know, embarrassing, right? I'm failing my job. I'm going tonight. I'm going to see it.
We will check back in later and we'll find out exactly what your thoughts were on it, because we also talked about the Emily Wilson review of it, which has just recently come out. So you'll get to tie all of this together in future and potentially keep it to yourself to avoid all these people being mad at you, as they often are.
Come at me.
I mean, you have of all of the people in the world who are qualified to talk about this, sure, some people will be like, well, a classicist who does Homeric literature or whatever, but you're a Greek warfare guy.
So yeah, if there was an Iliad movie coming out, I would be even more qualified. But even that, we tend to break down our specialisms quite a lot. And this is, for the very good reason that it's very hard to keep up with any scholarly field now. So I feel like, if you ask me, do you know your Homer? Of course, I've read it, I've taught it, but I'm not a specialist on Homer. I work on a period hundreds of years later.
Sure.
And in any other field of history, that would be okay, if you work on the modern day US, then 1600s is not your area.
Yeah.
But in ancient history, especially in the ancient Greek world, where, we're talking about a span of a millennium of history, very quickly this becomes, you're basically in that area, right? You should have the authority to speak on it.
It's the sort of telescoping nature, right? Where it's sort of the closer you are to it, people are yeah, I understand why you specialize on 20 years ago. But then something that's several thousand years ago, they're it's basically the same.
It's, you know what, Greeks are Greeks, right? And to some degree, there's obviously ways in which you can justify that. When do we have the text? When do we have most of the art that depicts these things? Fine, that's all in the period that I work on. But, you're talking about something that is itself quite far back in terms of its origins, in terms of the world that it's depicting is quite deliberately different from the world that I study. And, there's phases of development in between that are really quite important to the way that we understand the ancient Greek.
Sure.
So in that sense, I would say, okay, this is a different world we're talking about. But of course,
yeah,
it's so foundational.
The other thing I was going to say outside of the Odyssey and general Greek classic stuff is you have I always say things are dubious honors, but maybe this is a dubious honor. The Alcibiades episode is my dad's favorite episode of this podcast.
I'm going to write that down. I'm going to put that in my CV. Yeah.
He said he's gone back and listened to it several times because he thinks it's so funny.
That's beautiful. I love that. Your dad's favorite podcaster. I'll take that.
Yeah. I mean, look, anybody's dad's favorite podcaster is always going to be a classicist. It's you or Tom Holland or whatever. That's who you're up against.
Yeah, I think military history, classics, all good. Yeah. But no, this is fine. I mean, obviously, I'm very happy to have an audience to get people interested in this field. I hope that he gets something out of it. I hope that he hates Alcibiades with a burning passion now.
I think, based on the listener numbers, thousands of people hate Alcibiades in a way that perhaps didn't before, and perhaps had never heard of the man before.
Mission accomplished.
So if nothing else.
Yeah.
And how do we classify that on the ref framework for the UK?
Impact, yeah. I have spread hate. Is that good or bad?
Well, I mean, it depends. In the UK, sometimes they're like very into that. I mean, at the moment, spreading hate is, I think, a positive
It's
there.
basically the way it's going, yeah. No, I'll spin it as spreading a critical view on source material, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm spreading, a good analysis of the ancient past with a sort of a sensible, grounded judgment on the figures of, no, whatever, I'm having fun.
Critical methodology. I always talk about
Yes.
this show is sort of implicitly, sneakily teaching listeners critical historical methodologies that they otherwise would not have known to engage with, blah, 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 blah. But really, it's me chatting with my friends about people we hate.
No, it's a funny thing when people accuse you of like, aren't you judging people from the past by modern standards? It's like, no. You've been judging people from the past and we're trying to undo that.
Yeah.
We're returning to what the sources are actually telling us about these figures. That's all I'm really doing.
Look, I'm guided by the evidence. This is highly qualified hating specifically. I did so many years of schooling to be able to do this. I want to be very clear about it. I had to take paleography classes, and here we are.
We're certified haters. Yeah, you do say that.
Yeah, qualified, certified.
Yeah, we've got the paperwork to prove it. Yeah, that's it.
Authenticated.
We've got the peer-reviewed publications.
I had to do a Viva
yeah,
for
there
this.
you go.
We could probably move on to the person that we're talking about today. Initially, when you brought this person up, you were like, I don't know if he's as famous as Alcibiades, so people might not want to hear about him. And I said, well, that's great, actually, because part of this is we can make him famous for being horrible. And you said, great, I'm in.
Absolutely here for that, yeah. To be fair, like if the idea is to correct the record, I don't think anybody has ever thought this was a good guy.
Yeah.
But at the very least, people should know about him.
Yeah, they should know how not good he is. Yeah, and also even beyond the how not good he is, just who he is in general, because I didn't realize how many things that, or at least a few things that we talk about in modern life are actually associated with this guy. Like one metaphor that we use a lot is associated with this guy, which I'm excited about.
Right. You're talking about Sword of Damocles, yeah. This is
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
Heck yeah.
Who are we talking about?
So we're talking about Dionysius of Syracuse, properly Dionysius the First, who was a tyrant of the city of Syracuse in Sicily. So this is not Syracuse, New York. This is one of the settlements of the wider Greek world. So when we think of Greece now, we think of the sort of the boundaries of the modern nation state of Greece. But actually in the ancient world, of course, the Greeks were spread across a much wider area around the Mediterranean. There were settlements from Egypt to Spain to the Black Sea. Many of them concentrated on the coastline of Sicily. Some of those had been very early settlements around the 8th century, including Syracuse, which is the biggest of them all. Mm-hmm. And by the 5th century BC, Syracuse gets sort of catapulted into the consciousness of the Greeks, first because it plays a very important role at the time of the Persian Wars, when there's a Carthaginian invasion of Sicily that they fight off. And then after that, because the Athenians tried to conquer Sicily, they wage a big war with Syracuse in particular. They besiege the city for 2 years and they are defeated, which is the great turning point in the sort of story of the Athenian Empire, when suddenly their great endeavors, which had previously seemed unstoppable, are brought to nothing by a rival who proves strong enough to beat them. And so Syracuse is looming large in Greek history in this period. And then at the very end of the 5th century BC, when another Carthaginian invasion has arrived and is taking Greek cities along the south coast of Sicily one at a time, you have the rise of this figure, Dionysius of Syracuse. I mean, he ends up being essentially the most powerful Greek of his time. He rules Syracuse for 38 years, which is a really, really long tyranny. Obviously, he's quite successful at keeping himself in power. Yeah. Despite numerous setbacks, defeats, and crises, he manages to retain his power over Syracuse, but not just the city of Syracuse. He spreads his authority firstly over Sicily, then southern Italy, and even up the Adriatic. He's raiding in Etruscan territory in northern Italy. He's settling cities in Croatia. He's all over the place in that part of the Mediterranean. He is by far the most powerful ruler of the Greek world in that period, up to the rise of Philip of Macedon. And literally, I mean, the historian who preserves the main narrative about him, Diodorus of Sicily, calls him one of the two most powerful people in the world, Dionysius of Syracuse and, of course, Artaxerxes II, the king of Persia.
That was a lot of information
Sorry, I have to do a lot of this because obviously, like, people don't
Yeah.
necessarily think of Sicilian Greece as being like part of this
Yeah.
whole world, but it's actually one of the bigger parts and one of the wealthier and more developed parts of the Greek world, to the extent that a lot of the philosophies and arts and plays and things like that are emerging in dialogue with the great cities of Sicily. There's a huge amount of
Hmm.
architecture that's preserved there. Some of the finest ancient Greek sites are in Sicily that you can go see today, like the ruins there of the great temples of Selinus and Akragas. Magnificent sites. Syracuse itself is glorious, but also because Syracuse is genuinely, at some points in its history, the biggest Greek city, right? So Athens is obviously famously the biggest Greek city for much of the 5th century BC. But because of the great population shifts that happen in the course of, not least those triggered by Dionysius that we'll talk about, Syracuse ends up being the largest, the most populous Greek city, and certainly most powerful Greek city in much of the 4th century BCE.
Okay. So for him to be a tyrant here and be a tyrant for this long is like very impressive. And we should think of him, even though a lot of people will not be familiar with him now, we should think of him as like a wildly important figure at the time that he was alive. And also, I assume, for quite a while afterwards as well.
Absolutely. He looms hugely in the sort of history of this period. I mean, you see kind of little glimpses of the history because we're focusing so much on Athens and Sparta. He pops up every now and then. Like, he's an ally of the Spartans for a long time, so he sends some troops that affects their course of their war with Thebes, which is really nice. He is at war with Athens during that period, but then later, because the Athenians changed sides and joined the Spartan alliance, there's actually some epigraphic evidence of him making an alliance with the Athenians. So we know him not just from historical narratives, but also from the stone, essentially. So we know that he's there meddling in the affairs of mainland Greece, but of course his interest is mainly further west. But because he's around for such a long time, because he's so powerful, he becomes in many ways the archetypal tyrant of this period.
How long is someone normally a tyrant for?
So it depends, really. I mean, obviously, if you're successful, then you get to be a tyrant until the end of your life. But that,
Sure.
many people become tyrants quite late in their life because it requires a lot of wealth and influence and power to be built up first. So Pisistratus of Athens is one of the best known examples. He ruled for about 20 years when he finally managed to establish his power. And that's considered a really stable period in Athenian history, right? Like that's quite a long rule. And then his sons took over. 38 years is spectacularly long, and he manages that because he comes to power when he's still really young. And this is quite shocking. He's only about 25 when he becomes tyrant of the most powerful city in the Greek world, which is a hell of an achievement. And he manages to hold on to that, through just both through military successes, both through like shrewd internal and external policies, but also by just a staggering cruelty and willingness to commit violence against his opponents, as well as a sort of all-consuming paranoia against anybody who might be considered his enemies. So it's a really, really wild story from start to finish.
And even like both of those things seem to me like through lines in the show in general, which is that we'll be like, this guy was in power for a long time, and part of it is because he really did kill a lot of people and was really worried about people killing him. And so he was sort of preemptive in a lot of these things.
This guy, he wore an iron cuirass at all times because he was so afraid of assassination, right? Like, he was just armored at dinner. He was armored whenever.
Never nude, but it's with your cuirass.
There are dozens of tyrants.
Instead of your jorts, you're in the shower and your cuirass.
The best anecdote, which is almost certainly not true, but is reported by Cicero, and I obviously love it for very personal reasons. He had a ditch around his bed. He had a ditch around his bed with a drawbridge.
How big's the bed and how big's the bedroom? How big's the ditch?
I know. It's sufficient is
What's
the answer
in the
to
ditch?
that. He has a ditch around his bed. He goes in there at night and pulls up the drawbridge so that he's safe when he's sleeping.
See, the thing is, either that's like a funny metaphor happening via Cicero, or this is real, and then I am trying to figure out the internal schematics of what a room with a ditch inside of it.
It's a big house. I mean, he lives on Ortygia, which is basically the old center of Syracuse. He turned the entire, what is now the old center of the city, into his own personal fortress. And so he's got a huge area of the old city of Syracuse, which is their Acropolis. Essentially, it's an island just off the coast that's connected to the coast by a causeway. And that is his palace. And so he's got a lot of space. And possibly he would have been able to build this fort in a way that allowed him to have, a last line of defense around his bed.
And he uses it to watch Wired.com YouTube videos to find out that the main thing that everyone needs in military fortification is a big-ass ditch.
Big-ass ditch. And he does have, Ortigia is an island itself, so it's surrounded by water, which is also pretty good already. But then, you got to have that last line. You got to have that ditch around your bed. I'm going to be working on this now. If I ever live on the ground floor, that's happening. If I ever live on the top floor, that floor is coming out. Like, that's not...
That's actually better if you cut the floor at a hole.
Right. We can make a sort of little mezzanine thing. Yeah.
I'm trying to imagine the physics of having a hole around the bed, but the bed still, you just need a plinth below it.
Yeah, exactly. Just a plinth, and then you need to access it from the same level. But with a drawbridge, you got to have drawbridge. That's the key to this whole schema.
And that's great for your partner who will love.
Who cares about this?
Nobody's getting up for water in the night. I'm sorry.
Well, this is actually something I was wondering when I was reading this, is like, does he sleep alone? I don't actually know this, right? But it does, because we do know from classical Greek, like Athenian sources, that husband and wives would sleep in the same bed normally, unless there was some reason why that wouldn't happen. And so presumably he just didn't do that, possibly because he didn't trust his wife, which is also entirely in character.
We will also be talking about the wife situation later in this, because I have some questions.
I say wife singular, but that's more complicated than that. Yeah.
Yeah, I have some questions about the wife situation. A lot of this episode is going to be me saying, is this thing A, real, and B, normal? Basically.
Yeah. The answer is likely no and no, but...
No and no. Hi there, it's Claire. The episode you're currently listening to is free for everybody, but the next one won't be. Because we're trying to make this show independently and sustainably, we switch off between free weeks and Patreon weeks. So, if you're a fan of good, accurate public history made by actual experts, consider supporting our Patreon. It's only one tier, which means everyone who subscribes gets access to the same perks across the board. For the price of a pair of socks, you'll get access to a new episode every week instead of just the bi-weekly free ones, and they'll all be ad-free for you. You'll also get access to the full episode archive, bonus content, early access to merch, and lots of other fun Patreon exclusives to sweeten the deal. Just head over to patreon.com/thisguysucked or follow the link in the episode description to sign up. Can you tell me, so he becomes tyrant relatively young. What do we know about his life pre-tyranny?
So we know practically nothing. We just know that he was considered to be from a good family, but when he comes to power, he is essentially a clerk. Like, he works for the Syracusan Board of Generals. And we're not really sure what that function even is, because there is no direct parallel to that in Athens, where most of this kind of administrative work is done by enslaved people. So you don't really have somebody who does this kind of job, but he has some kind of administrative task that means that he is able to work with the Board of Generals that the Syracusans have to command their armies. At this point, Syracuse is a democracy, so they work in similar ways to the Athenians, where they have a board of generals that gets elected every year, and they're accountable to the assembly. And so that is the moment when we first hear of Dionysius of Syracuse, is that he basically comes in as this sort of administrative official who has been sort of on campaign with them against the Carthaginians. He has apparently distinguished himself in battle. He comes home and says, but these guys messed everything up, and that's why we're losing. Like, that's why Akragas, the big city, fell. And so he basically comes out with this accusation. He comes out swinging, basically, at his return from this campaign. And that is essentially the first thing we hear about him. There is a rumor that he may have been involved with, or at least connected to, the family of Hermocrates of Syracuse, who was the great general against the Athenians a few years before that. And he may have been involved in his coup, but that's a very shady story. We don't exactly know the ins and outs of that.
So we think that he has an administrative job. Does that preclude him from being somehow involved in the running of the military? How does this... I'm really trying to piece this together in my mind.
Yeah. So the generals have the job of commanding the army, right? There's usually a board of them so that there isn't a single man in charge. This is for the Greek democracies, this is very important. You always have a board of generals.
Look, I don't think it's a bad idea.
Right. And he is, as we'll see, and he is essentially doing admin support for them. And it's not really clear. This is literally all hinges on one word in Diodorus, right? Like, we don't actually know that much about what that job entailed. But most likely what he's doing is the kind of things that also in Athens would have been assigned to certain people. He's doing, the bookkeeping, essentially, making sure that soldiers get paid, making sure that supplies come in, these kinds of things, which is the larger the army, the more important, and the longer it's on campaign, the more important that role becomes. And perhaps the most important representative of that is Eumenes, who was Alexander's bookkeeper, who ends up being one of the successors and one of the great generals of the time that follows. So you have some of these people who, rise to a significant position just because they are trusted members of the machine that makes these operations work.
How does he go from that to guy in charge of the most powerful place in Greece?
As very often happens in these democracies, because you're just speaking to the assembly, right? You have this concept that everybody's free to speak to the assembly, and if the people like your proposals, then they will vote for them. He says that all these generals have messed up, and that is why Akragas has fallen to the Carthaginians, and why the people of Akragas who have fled are now refugees living in Syracuse, right, or being settled nearby. Everybody can see the miserable consequences of the decision to withdraw from Akragas, which they did because supplies had run out. I mean, it's not for a bad reason. I mean, they just weren't able to feed themselves. But this is something that he accuses them of doing either on purpose because they're in cahoots with the Carthaginians or just because they're incompetent. The assembly approves, sacks the generals, elects a new board of generals, and lo and behold, Dionysius gets elected. And this is because there is no professional military, right? Like anybody can be elected general if people think that they have their wits about them in a military situation. Sometimes some really weird people get elected general. Sophocles gets elected general because he writes so well about war, right? This is the kind of thing that happens sometimes in these systems where you trust a couple of reliable hands that you elect over and over again, and then the rest can be anyone you think can have a go, like give them an opportunity to see what they do. So that's when he becomes one of the generals.
Look, I said this with Curtis Dozier on his episode when we were talking about Greek democracy. Some of these things could be better than look.
It's not gone without notice by modern political thinkers, I think, because one of the things that it really prevents is apathy, right? It breaks through this idea that you're not involved in democratic politics. It doesn't matter how you vote because you can see the result, right? Like these people directly influence what happens and who's in charge and what they do, and they're accountable to the people.
Yeah, so you could be like a Fox News host, and then you become in charge of the Department of War.
Maybe bad example.
Without an election. But this is without an election, right? Nobody thought this guy was going to be good at this.
Yeah, well, he was at least going to be like maybe holding them to account. Like he seemed to, and this is what's very much happening in this period. And generally, of course, the people who get elected to the generalship, they tend to be from the richer parts of the population, just because they are the ones who have a training in oratory. They can convince people. They might have some education in warfare as well. We don't know. They are commanders of the cavalry and things like that. The rich people things. And so he gets to portray them as essentially being oligarchs, as enemies of democracy. And that's very often like the tactic here. What he's doing is he's saying, but I champion you, the people. And it's classic populism. It's absolutely the way where you basically say like, these guys don't have your best interests at heart. I, in fact, speak on your behalf. I am the one who gets what you want.
Yeah. Isn't that always the way to be like, I truly believe in democracy. I will immediately become a tyrant.
If you just do what I want, I think you'll find it's what you want. No, exactly. And in fact, it's the old line where he basically says, these guys were incompetent because they did their job and looked after you. In fact, let's have the rule of common sense instead of these experts. Let's actually say, your opinion is much more important than whatever they think who have done this many times before.
This is too real.
It's very much along the same lines.
Oh, no.
Where the experienced generals don't know what they're doing. In fact, me, the completely inexperienced guy who apparently fought pretty well to his credit, but otherwise has absolutely no military experience, I'm the one to guide you through this. And remember, he is at this point 24, 25 years old. Like he is young.
Oh my God.
In Athens, he would not be eligible for the generalship because he's too young. Like you have to be at least 30. So this is like crazy even by Alcibiades standards.
24? That's like my students.
Yeah.
My student being like, let me run the military.
Like master student, early PhD kind of student. He's like, I'll lead the largest army in the Greek world. That's cool.
Oh, no. Okay, yeah.
To everyone's surprise, he does pretty well at first. Like they have some decent successes initially, but when he marches out, like when he tries to organize things within the city, the problem is that he needs to, first of all, try and establish himself at the expense of these other generals. And so that's where things really sort of start to go wrong. He first tries to basically portray the other generals as being in cahoots with the Carthaginians. Like he's saying they're betraying the city. They're not doing what's right. So you need to get rid of them. They are in the process of supporting Gela, which is kind of the next city over on the Carthaginian list of targets. So the Carthaginians are marching on Gela. Dionysius says, don't worry, I'll support you, but first I got to go home and sort these other issues. By the other issues, he means having to deal with other generals who might also have something to say about what the armed forces are doing. He accuses them all of being traitors who are helping the Carthaginians, and that they should have singularity of leadership, which is a common theme among these kinds of stories, where you need to make sure that one person is in charge rather than having this board, which just messes everything up and makes us vulnerable to bribery and things like that, corruption. So what they should do, what the people should do, is declare Dionysius to be strategos autokrator, which is the title that I talked about in the Alcibiades episode, which Alcibiades got declared too. It's like essentially general with full powers, or supreme general, who has more authority than the other generals. This is a very anti-democratic function. This is absolutely always associated with tyrants. Like, this is the step you need. Like, if you're there, you're like half a step to tyranny, right? Like, if you're a strategos autokrator, you're practically there. So he gets that. He gets voted that. And then he has to go and establish himself as tyrant, which he does in the classic way. And obviously the ancient sources already declare that this is something that he's clearly sort of cribbing from Pisistratus, this earlier Athenian tyrant. He stages an assassination attempt. He basically arranges for someone to pretend to murder him in the night, causes a big panic, makes a lot of noise, burns fire through the night so everybody knows there's an emergency going on. He declares in the morning, when everything's settled down, like, somebody tried to murder me, you have to vote me a bodyguard.
He Reichstag fires himself.
Sorry?
And is like, look.
100%, that's what it is, yeah. Yeah, it's literally just this idea of creating this sense of a threat to your life so that you can then seize power by saying, okay, well, I need a bodyguard, right? My life's in danger. And it's these guys, the cavalry in Syracuse, these oligarchs, obviously, these people who are not, on your side people, not on the people's side, who are plotting against me. And so he gets his bodyguard, and inevitably every single time throughout Greek history, if you get a bodyguard of mercenaries, you're seizing power, you're a tyrant now. That is how it works. Because you get that bodyguard out of mercenaries, because that's their job. They're professionals. They will be able to protect you. But that sets you up with a military force against the citizenry, right? So if the citizens object to you becoming their tyrant, you will say, well, I have another force that I can use to essentially fight you if you must, like if it comes to that.
No worries. I've got it handled.
Totally fine. I have a paramilitary organization that's loyal directly to me. When has that ever caused any problems?
I will say, from this episode already and the Alcibiades one, it seems like the people that you think about, not just like the guys, but the people around them, their city-states, are addicted to stepping on rakes. Like, they love to be like, let's just, this thing that has always worked out very badly in the past, maybe this time it will go well.
Yeah, so you have to imagine, like, instead of assuming that everybody in Syracuse is an idiot, you have to imagine that these people are terrified because the Carthaginians are at the gates, right? And they have an army that supposedly, according to the sources, 120,000 men. We don't believe those numbers, but the idea is that this is like, an army from the songs, right? This is an army that will destroy the Greek world, right? And they have already seen Selinus has fallen, destroyed. Acragas has fallen, destroyed. Gela is under threat of being next. These cities are being wiped out, right? Like, they're being razed to the ground. So you know that this is what's hanging over their heads, and you realize that what they want is just something that makes them feel like, okay, we actually do have a chance of coming out of this alive. And again, this is not something that is happening sort of out to the west and they kind of know about, they hear about it. No. The refugees from these places are in the city, right? They can see exactly what happens to these populations. They know what goes on. And so what they do is quite extreme. And in hindsight, you can say it's quite stupid, but it's because they're facing an unprecedented crisis. So on the one hand, while Dionysius is organizing his little, Reichstag fires, there is also genuinely an enemy at the gates. And he has to go and fight them. Like, that's his first act as tyrant, is he has to lead the army out to fight the Carthaginians. Obviously, that was what they were hoping he would do, right? That's essentially, they're saying, we will, in the time-honored fashion of putting a strongman in charge, people want that if it means that they can get safety in exchange, right? That's what they're bargaining for.
Totally.
And they probably recognize, a lot of the people in Syracuse probably recognize that this isn't a great move, but at the same time, he is credibly accusing his opponents of wanting to overthrow democracy anyway and replace it with an oligarchy. So to some extent, they may say this is the lesser of two evils. Certainly that's what Dionysius is trying to convince them of. But they might also say, well, we just trust this guy more to try and get us out of this fire, because it is really, really dangerous right now. Like, it is is serious crisis is unfolding in the West.
Yeah, and to be fair, the stepping on rakes thing, it's more like, yes, with historical hindsight, yeah, in the long term, not so good. In the short term, one can certainly understand why someone would be like, what we're doing is not working. I know this hasn't worked out so good for us in the past, but we really need to solve this really the clear and present danger that we are facing at this moment. This guy seems best equipped for it.
Right. And then on top of that, I mean, he does all sorts of things that people recognize, like, oh, this is just a really good move. Like, what are we going to do? He, obviously is accusing a lot of people of being oligarchs. So he's executing or sending them into exile in order to support or to establish his power. And then oligarchs, for the most part, tend to be very rich citizens. So what can he do? Like, he can confiscate their lands and then say, oh, here's a bunch of poor people who have no land. Here's a bunch of enslaved people who don't have any sort of property or even legal personhood. What if I just give them the land and make them citizens, right?
Mm-hmm.
And obviously that means that there is a whole bunch of people around Syracuse who are suddenly tied to him personally. Like they owe their entire civic status to him. And if the oligarchs come back, they would be stripped of it again. So, this is him sort of trying to establish all sorts of groups in Syracuse who owe their position, owe their wealth, owe their prosperity and their position and even their freedom completely to him personally. Which means that if a crisis happens, he's just got a lot of people that he can call on and say, you owe me. Like, go on, grab your weapons that I paid for, literally, and fight for me. And so he's doing that very cleverly in order to try and make sure that he has this groundswell. He has grassroots support among different parts of the population. He's supporting a lot of mercenaries. One of the critical things he does straight away when he comes into some money from oligarchs is pay the mercenaries, which is also one of those brilliant moves where you're just like, their pay's in arrears. If you want them to be loyal, be the one who pays them, right? Don't just sort of say, okay, let's pay them, but be the one who says, I'm solving this problem for you. You owe me now. Like, you know that I'm good for it, but also if you're looking for someone to lead you, I'm your guy, obviously. Like, I'm the one who gets things done. I'm the one who fills your pockets. And so this is the kind of things that he does. So he creates groups within society, both native and mercenary and, formerly enslaved, who are directly loyal to him. And that is what allows him to establish himself as tyrant.
I mean, it sounds like a good plan. The thing is, like, thus far, the things haven't been that bad. There's also an interesting thing where it's sort of like one of the main problems that we see happening over and over again in history is like not paying your mercenaries, for example, or not having a good guard around you or whatever. And this guy has sort of been like, I'm going to mitigate all of these problems.
Tick all of them boxes,
Before we even get to power, I'm just going to sort these problems out now.
Yep.
Which is a good tech. And again, he does this for like over 30 years, almost 40 years. So clearly he sort of set himself up well.
In an increasingly ruthless fashion, as we'll see. I mean, it gets really bad sometimes, the way that he's willing to play one group against another and to just sort of turn on a dime in terms of who he depends on. When he starts to feel like people are maybe not so loyal anymore, or when they've outlived their usefulness, or even just when they cost too much, he is very happy to throw them under the bus. I mean, that is something he does absolutely constantly. But in this case, obviously, he needs his supporters. So the ones who are under the bus currently are the Syracusan oligarchs and the cavalry, because those are the most obvious target, and the ones he finds it easiest to rally, resentment against, which is obviously something that matters as well. There is this underlying dynamic where lots of people in Syracuse, where inequality is rife, are not happy to be ruled by or to be dominated by this small elite of wealthy cavalrymen.
So is seizing power? How does this turn into him being a tyrant? What is the connecting piece that goes from he's in charge of all of the military stuff to he's in charge of everything?
Yeah, so this is very much that crisis he creates when he seizes, like he gets a bodyguard assigned to him, and at that point he's basically a tyrant.
And they're like, okay, you can have it.
The problem is, like, does he call himself a tyrant? We don't really know, right? Like, this is always something that, can you just go out and call yourself like, I'm a tyrant, now deal with it? The title that he seems to prefer, which he uses on coinage and which is used for him in Athenian inscriptions, which is very nice of them to kind of humor him, is Archon of Sicily. And that's a really nice neutral term, because archon essentially just means magistrate. I mean, it literally means leader, but it's an office. And Athenian democracy has 9 archons. Like very serious, legitimate systems of participatory government have archons. There's nothing wrong with having an archon. Like, an archon is a completely time-honed and legitimate office. It's just Archon of Sicily. There is no such state. He just calls himself that because it's not king, it's not tyrant, it's not ruler or anything. It's just I'm the guy who's in charge. And he clearly wants to present that in a way that is palatable to people. They don't feel like he's being, an oppressive tyrant in that way. He's calling himself Archon because it is something that he can presumably get away with without sort of rubbing too many feathers. And so that is like a very deliberate propaganda move, right? He doesn't really go out and call himself the tyrant. But from that moment when he has a bodyguard, when he's ensconced in the city in the Acropolis of Syracuse on Ortygia, basically everybody knows, like, there is no legitimate body that can deny him whatever he wants. He does maintain the offices of the Syracusan democracy in a lot of ways. Like, he lets the Syracusan democracy kind of continue alongside, which is also something that Pisistratus did in Athens, for instance. You co-opt people in the system by giving them this sense that things are going on as normal, same as, the Senate continued to exist under the Roman Empire. But in effect, he's in charge.
A lot of this is just like, it's so interesting to me because we haven't even gotten to ostensibly the things that he does that are really bad. Like, we've done a lot of the setup here where we're kind of like, he does all of these things, he gets power in this way that's like kind of shady, but also you can understand why people support him, like all this stuff where you're like, okay, there's clearly, beyond like military tactics, there are some interesting political tactics happening. He's clearly a good tactician, just politically and socially. What's wrong with him? What does he do that's bad after he has power? It seems like there's a lot.
Well, yeah, and so there's a lot. I mean, first of all, like, if he rises to power as the great champion against the Carthaginians, his track record is mixed at best. The first thing he does is lose Gela as well. So, like, he doesn't actually manage to reward the Syracusans for their trust with a string of victories. He actually just loses. But he manages to essentially eradicate the local party that was rising up to resist him at that point. The people who are actually trying to oust him, most of them get killed in the ensuing fight, but others are sent into exile, and they're just kind of stripped of their property, which he divides up. So he's completely disruptive within the fabric of his own political community in order to establish his power. But then after that, it's basically just the relentless ambition that drives him forward, right? He's constantly seeking enemies in order to secure his rule. He cannot abide peace because in peacetime, the Syracusans are going to think, why do we have this guy again?
Yeah.
They're obviously going to wonder why they're under a tyrant when there's no crisis for that tyrant to resolve. And so he is always looking for someone to fight. And when that happens, very often, as is normal in Greek warfare, when these unprovoked wars happen, a city falls because he has the greater power. He has this enormous mercenary army, which he is investing massively into. He's prompting a lot of military innovation in a lot of different ways because the way that he organized this army is completely new to the Greek world in this period. This enormous army relying primarily on mercenaries because he cannot trust his citizens. So levies are not trustworthy for him. But that means he has this enormously professional and powerful instrument with which he can just smack everyone around. So first he defeats all the different Greek communities. And when he takes those cities, like, very commonly, the men are all killed, the women and children are enslaved. This is an incredibly violent and brutal measure that gets taken against anybody who dares to resist him. The entire population is held responsible and viciously punished. He just goes around the entire area of Sicily and later on southern Italy as well, just destroying one city after another, often taking the remaining population to Syracuse to become part of his sort of body of, ever-growing body of potential recruits and taxpayers. But in other cases, just submitting it to resettled populations that he says, okay, you guys go live over here now. The land is free somehow. No one lives on it anymore. Wonder how that happened.
Magically.
You go and use it. And then establishing these loyal communities all around Sicily and southern Italy. He stocks up an enormous armada arsenal for the war against Carthage, which he launches again in the 390s. I mean, initially he's saved from Carthaginian reprisals by a plague that breaks out in this Carthaginian camp when they besiege Syracuse. So he gets lucky, right? That's how he manages to save Syracuse, which is the last stronghold in Sicily at that point.
They all get cyclosporiasis or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they encamping near a swamp, which is not a good plan. Syracuse gets saved from that several times, including twice the Carthaginians, when they're besieging Syracuse under Dionysius, they get the plague in the camp and they have to break camp and run away because they're dying.
Damn.
So he gets very lucky in that sense. But the second war, he starts it and he just goes and marches and tries to drive the Carthaginians out of Sicily. Now, obviously, from the Greek point of view, that might be legitimate as a move, but it is just an incredibly violent genocidal act, right? He is destroying communities. This is extremely explicit when he's besieging Motia, which is one of the great siege set pieces of Diodorus of Sicily, what is his historical account, which is this incredibly stubborn fight for the walls and then the houses. Each individual house has to be fought over. Every single person knows that they're going to die, so they fight to the absolute last breath. It's a heroic defense of the city, but the troops of Dionysius get more and more angry as these people refuse to give up. And so they become more and more violent in their reprisals against anybody they capture. They just start killing everyone. They're destroying the city. They don't care about people seeking refuge in temples. They don't care about people trying to supplicate them, trying to surrender. They just kill everyone. And in the middle of that, we're told Dionysius is running around the city screaming, trying to stop them from killing everyone. Because he needs money, he wants to sell them into slavery.
Sure.
And that's the kind of guy that he is, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's like one of those things that this happens a lot in the show, but we'll be like, oh, the reason you think this person is doing a good thing, they're doing it for a bad reason. Like they're not doing it for, there's nothing altruistic here. He's doing it because he would rather they were enslaved than dead and therefore more profitable.
If he has ever done a kindness in his life, I mean, there's this great line from Titus Andronicus, I think. It's like, if ever in my life I did a good thing, I regret it with my very soul. It's this kind of idea where every time he does something nice, you know that it's for his own benefit in this massive way, right? And that is the only reason he ever does anything nice. Otherwise, every single thing that he does is just transgressively violent. And that is because that is the way that he grew up, essentially in this Sicilian environment, where he knew that, the Carthaginians were doing that before him. The Athenians were planning to do that with Syracuse. He is a product of war. His power is a product of war, and he will establish himself by absolutely just burning, pillaging, and ravaging everyone around him until they stop resisting. That is what he commits his career to. And even Sicily is too small, right? Like he immediately goes out into, when the Carthaginians are finally sort of at rest, they've paid him tribute, he's making sure they stay away. And so he turns his attention to other communities in southern Italy, and he goes and fights the local populations there, and he goes and fights the Greek communities there. He has this long siege of Regium, which he destroys. This is Reggio di Calabria for modern Reggio di Calabria for modern listeners. These cities are also destroyed by Dionysius. And then he starts extending his power into the Adriatic, and it's all for the same reason. He wants to get fingers in more pies so that he can get called away to be the savior of some community that owes him, so that he can take more loot and that he can establish his power over more communities. With some really spectacular results. There are settlements, Faros, which is settled on what is now Hvar in Croatia, which has incredible, like this UNESCO heritage site, the way that the city is laid out. This is a new Greek settlement in the 4th century BC, settled by Dionysius of Syracuse. He is the one who's trying to establish his power in Dalmatia, right? Like all the way in what is now Croatia, way up into the Adriatic. He is settling cities. And that is because A, he wants to extend his power, B, he wants more people to owe him, and C, he needs mercenaries. So he needs connections in these lands that export mercenaries.
And as we've established, he needs enough money to pay said mercenaries, because that's the way that you keep mercenaries on your side. That's kind of the main thing you have to do.
There's a really, really interesting theory, which is unfortunately not confirmed by any source, but it is based on plausibility. Tim Cornell made this argument years ago, and it was repeated, I think, favorably by recent scholarship, is the idea that when Rome is sacked in 390 BCE, is one of the earliest events that we know in Roman history, is that Rome is brutally sacked in 390 BCE. And then, it's not sacked after that for like 800 years or something. Like this is a huge traumatic moment in Roman history. Rome at that time is not big, it's not powerful. It's still at the very beginning of its rise to power over Latium, over the region that it's in. It's one of the growing cities of the region. It's sacked in 390 BC by Gauls. Why were the Gauls there? The traditional narrative is they're looking for land. No one really buys that, because why'd they go that far south looking for land? It's not an obvious place to go looking for land. They don't take any land. They just sack the city. Why are they there? Well, very likely it's because Dionysius had called them over, essentially, to come and serve his armies. They were on the way south. At the moment when he couldn't pay them, he said, here's a target, get your money from there.
Sure.
So this is one of the only moments where we could plausibly say that a Greek sacked Rome.
Oh, that's interesting.
That happened. And obviously this is a tentative theory based on the coincidence of certain moments and events.
Yeah.
But there are many parallels of this kind of thing happening where basically peoples are coming in from the north in order to serve a paymaster, right? This is a moment in their sort of coming of age, as well as in their sort of way of establishing themselves in their own societies, that they go and do mercenary service abroad for a little while. A lot of Gauls are doing this at the time, mostly in the Hellenistic kingdoms. But of course, later on, you see a lot of this in the 3rd century in particular. But in this early period, you already have these bands that sometimes are just available. They're being drawn out. But, if you can pay them, you bring them into your armies. If you can't pay them, they're going to want to eat, right? They're going to want to come home with something. So you just tell them like, well, I can't pay you, but these people have lots of stored wealth. You can just take it, right? Like just go over there and hurt them instead.
I know someone else who's available. I mean, I think part of this is like, in terms of plausibility, like based on everything else we know about this guy, it's not out of character. Like that would not be an out of character way to have handled the situation.
It is so far not out of character. I mean, we do know that later on he actually does sail to a place 50 kilometers north of Rome and sacks an Etruscan community there, including plundering a temple, which is sacrilege. Like Greeks aren't supposed to do that, right? Like plundering a temple is one of those things that you absolutely should never do. He does it because he needs the money. And he steals away with, we are told, 1,000 talents worth of dedications. So enormous, staggering amounts of money, plus 500 more talents from the sold spoils from the town nearby. So he's sacking towns just because he needs the money with people he has nothing to do with, right? So he's in that area. He's roving up and down the coast of Italy, essentially just taking whatever he can get. And so the idea that at one point a band of Gauls was moving out to join his service and he couldn't pay them, so he said, go and sack this town. I mean, what is it called? I don't know. Rome, never heard of it. Go and sack it, take the money from them. It's very plausible.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. It fits with all the other things that you've said. There are so many parts of this guy's life that I feel like I don't fully understand, in part because, as I said before we started this, I did less research on him than I did on some other people because I felt like often when I look at classical sources, it can be harder for me to determine like what do we think is real or plausible? I mean, like that's why like classics, for example, is often seen as like not a totally different discipline from history, but like as a whole other thing, because the source base that you have to work with and the amount of things you have to know in order to understand something are very different from like modern or contemporary history. So often when we're talking about people in ancient Greece or Rome, I'll be like, this is what I understood from this. And someone will be like, that's fake. That didn't happen. This was just a parable or whatever. And I'm like, damn, okay, I give up. Hello, it's Claire, which I assume you probably know because you've been listening to my voice for like a while at this point. I'm here to give you my normal mid-roll shout out to a multitude show that I think that you might be interested in listening to. If you're listening to This Guy Sucked, you're probably the kind of person who likes thinking about or even imagining the past. But what might a good future look like? Dreaming Against the Machine is a podcast about envisioning a realistic and hopeful future. Each week, the show's host, journalist and astrophysicist Dr. Adam Becker, has an earnest and entertaining conversation with a guest about possible futures seen through the lenses of history, science, and culture. In a world where tech oligarchs and their power fantasies are driving visions of the future, Dreaming Against the Machine aims to take back the terms of the public conversation about what our world can and should be. New episodes come out every Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts. But there are a few things that I was curious about with him, which is that some of his relationships, like family relationships, his son, there's weird stuff happening with his son. He has the wives, which we should talk about because I want to know if that's normal or not normal. I also read, and this is one of the things that I think might be a bit apocryphal or might not really have happened, that he sold Plato into slavery.
Yep.
That's like, what? Okay, so let's talk also on a personal level. What is this guy's fucking problem?
What is his fucking problem? He's got a few. I mean, one of the things, obviously, is that he's doing something that no Greek has done before. Like, he's establishing essentially a territorial empire. There is another Greek empire at the time, the Spartan Empire, but it is much more informal. It is essentially established by a number of unequal treaties between the Spartans and other Greek states, which leaves them largely independent. What Dionysius is doing is creating a super state out of Syracuse, right? And he calls himself, as I said, Archon of Sicily. So he's got something more in mind. In order to do that, he has to do things that other Greeks just don't have to worry about because they don't have the same kind of way of establishing their power. So in terms of his wives, that's one of the things he's doing that is very much going to be emulated by Philip of Macedon, which is polygamy. Essentially, he has several wives, which he does because he's trying to establish diplomatic connections, essentially good relations with different communities. So one of his wives is from the Syracusan nobility, or like from the rich in Syracuse, which is obviously his anchor to home. He will say, "Oh, I'm never going to be disloyal to Syracuse because my wife's from there." His first wife actually was the daughter of Hermocrates of Syracuse. Mm-hmm. So this is one of the greatest Syracusans ever to grace the historic record. His daughter was married to Dionysius, but she died in horrific circumstances when the Syracusan cavalry tried to throw Dionysius out, essentially early on in his career. There are some traces of a tradition that are variously reported, but fundamentally, the cavalry tried to outrage Dionysius in order to get him to commit mistakes by essentially hurting his wife. And so that's what they did to her, after which she either died or took her own life in response to what was done to her. So she never bore him any children. She just sort of died in horrific circumstances very early in his reign. So that is a terrible story. He then remarried another Syracuse noble, but also somebody from the Greek community of Locris, which is across the water in southern Italy. So he has multiple different wives, which is obviously not a Greek thing. That generally doesn't happen. The only way that's justified is just because he has so much power, he needs to maintain all these different relations. But he genuinely does have two different wives with whom he has, fulfilled marriages, in the sense that he has two sons with both of them and potentially also daughters. Mm-hmm. So he has children with both of them, and they survive him and end up being, in many ways, some of them end up being his useful sort of agents and generals in some cases. His brothers are also his generals. So this is very much a family undertaking.
And his brother, okay, tell me if this is right or wrong. Does his brother-in-law marry his daughter?
Yeah.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, so that's a very common thing with Greek family connections. I mean, they're always trying to establish these things either multiple times over or just in general. You're really trying to make sure that those ties are not just one way, that they try and, as much as possible, try to follow both lines so that your interests are truly intertwined. And that's not just a Greek thing. I mean, that happens in the Persian Empire all the time.
Oh, yeah.
So that's just something that you do in order to make sure that these families are essentially pledging a lasting allegiance to each other, and they're basically saying like our interests are completely aligned now.
Yeah, and it obviously reappears in like later monarchies and all. Like this is like a normal as in people are doing it, and that's seen as a reasonable thing to do at this moment.
Yeah, and it often shades into the incestuous with the Greeks as well. I mean, they're very common cousin marriages that result from these kinds of connections, and that is also entirely accepted and decently normal. I mean, they're very opposed to incest, especially like brother-sister incest. It's completely off, it cannot be done. It's hated by the gods, as the Greeks say. But cousin marriages are very, very common. And that is something that is entirely because these marriages are political rather than born out of any kind of emotional attachment.
Also, the double marriage she has later, is that normal? Is that thing? Okay. I wanted to establish that.
So a lot of the tradition about Dionysius of Syracuse is basically because he becomes one of the archetypal tyrants. Like, he is the ultimate tyrant. Like, he's the most powerful one. He's the most famous one. He lasts for a really long time. Everybody has to deal with him. So Dionysius of Syracuse is the tyrant. As a result of that, a lot of later sources just have a lot of really negative traditions that become associated with him, right? So these stories that I told earlier, he wears a cuirass at all time. He has a ditch around his bed. These kinds of stories circulate about tyrants, and they express something about tyrants, which is they're paranoid, they're excessive, they're horrible. They're people who are so far beyond the norm that they have to live and become, morally corrupted in a way that is larger than life. Mm-hmm. And that is essentially something that is associated with tyrants, and we can never really trust whether any of that is real. And I think the biggest example of that, and one of the ways in which you can really show essentially political thought about tyranny in this period, is the Sword of Damocles story.
Please.
The sword of Damocles is hanging over my head.
So this is something we've talked about earlier, where essentially, this is about Dionysius of Syracuse. This is him. This is
This
his
is
story, or at
him.
least it's attached to him
Yes.
in the tradition. But it's fundamentally similar to what we hear elsewhere. So the story is that somebody who is a close confidant and associate of him, Damocles, was saying, in the true Greek manner of paresia, freedom of speech, he was saying to Dionysius, like, aren't you fortunate? Isn't it wonderful to have so much power and to have so much wealth and to have everybody at your beck and call? Isn't this wonderful? At which point Dionysius dared him and said, would you like to experience it? Would you like to try being this powerful, this wealthy? And Damocles says, yeah, that sounds ace. Let's try it. Let's give it a go. Hubristic, dangerous move. Generally,
Sure.
there's some kind of, snake in the grass when a proposal like this is made.
Yeah, no, this guy who famously will do anything to keep and maintain power will just give you some power for a little bit with no consequences.
Allegedly had even some of his own lovers killed, right? This is genuinely not a nice guy, so you don't really want to run this risk. The line is close. But in this case, he keeps his word. He just says, okay, I'm going to just, put you in this nice, beautiful gold bed, and I'm going to dress you in the finest clothes and draperies, and I'm going to have all these servants around you who will do everything you want. And look, they're the most handsome boys I've got. They will be absolutely at your beck and call. You can ask them for anything you want, how you like it. Are you enjoying it? And then in the middle of him sort of dining and enjoying this vast luxury, he has one of the servants hang a sword over his head by a single horsehair. And it's dangling over him. And at that point, as we're told, Cicero telling the story, from that moment, Damocles couldn't enjoy any of it anymore. He couldn't even think about the food or the drink or the servants or anything else. All he could think of was this sword hanging over his head by a single
Sure.
The sword of Damocles is hanging over my head.
And Dionysius says, how you like it now, right?
Yeah.
You have all the power in the world and it is literally hanging by a thread, right? That is the permanent state of being a tyrant. And that aligns exactly with Xenophon has a treatise from the same period when Dionysius was a tyrant. Xenophon, who's an Athenian who thinks about this quite a bit, writes this treatise called the Hiero, which is about an earlier tyrant of Syracuse. And it's clearly about Dionysius, right?
Yeah.
It is absolutely about him, which is an exploration of the idea like, he supposes that the poet Simonides, a very famous poet, famous from the epigrams of after the Battle of Thermopylae, this really, really famous guy who went to Syracuse at the end of his life and went into the employ of this tyrant. And the treatise supposedly is a dialogue between him on the subject of tyranny, where Simonides says, aren't you the luckiest man in the world because you're a tyrant? Everybody wants to be your friend. You have infinite wealth. You have these huge armies. You have this glorious city. You have infinite power. What could be better? And Hiero basically refutes him at every point and says, actually, it sucks. Now, this is obviously something that sounds a bit weird and ironic, but the idea is that the argument goes that it's bad to be a tyrant because at the moment that you have absolute power, you can't trust anyone anymore.
Yeah.
Everybody is jealous. No one's telling you the truth. Everybody could be plotting against you. The slightest slip up will cost you everything. You have everything, which means you have everything to lose, right? Everybody wants what you have, and there's nothing left for you to achieve except your own downfall. Mm-hmm. And so for the Greeks, in their mind, this is kind of the double-edged sword of tyranny, is that once you've achieved that absolute power, the only way is down. And the Sword of Damocles story expresses this exactly, where once you're in that position, the only thing that's actually going to be on your mind is any second this could all be over. It only takes, a single sword blow, like the snapping of a single thread, literally in the parable, to end everything, to put a stop to all of it. And that is why, Dionysius of Syracuse becomes increasingly paranoid, why he keeps getting rid of his own friends and confidants, why he has to keep this enormously oppressive regime going, which has like secret police roaming around trying to make sure, snuff out plots and conspiracies, why he's constantly moving populations around to try and ensure their loyalties, why he's constantly committing acts of horrific violence. It's because that is the only way to live once you are in that position of power, is maximal paranoid suspicion of everyone around you.
And I think that the Damocles story is also interesting because I like the idea of someone being like, well, you will become very paranoid, and here's how I ensure that you are paranoid. Here's how I make sure that you have this bad feeling that I have, which to some extent Dionysius creates for himself. Like all of these things, it's easy to be like, wow, that must be, and this, you're not doing this obviously, but it's easy to be like, wow, that must be really hard, like you do all
the world's smallest violin is playing for the man who rules Sicily and is not happy about it.
Yeah, like being like, oh, but you just have to deal with this paranoia. You'll have 30 years of killing everyone you've ever loved.
Yeah.
Sucks for them, but really it's terrible for me.
Now, admittedly, I will say this one thing for Dionysius is that he doesn't immediately kill everyone around him. Like, he does have a couple of moments where he sends people into exile, or people send themselves into exile. And especially with his brothers, he actually tries to reconcile himself with both of them, which he does successfully. So there's a couple of moments when he does try to say, okay, well, actually, I would like to trust you.
We'll just exile you instead of killing you, which is, I guess, a smaller mercy.
Well, it's about getting a second chance, right? Like, he does actually bring them back into the fold eventually. So I do believe that in some cases you can see that he wants to trust them and he wants to have people around him that he can rely on. But obviously, the idea is it's very hard, and that is entirely his own doing. Like, you could have just lived as a citizen in Syracuse and been happy your whole life, but instead you wanted this, and now you have it. Like, too bad, it sucks to be you, but it also...
You could have been on the board of generals and had people around you and not been the guy.
And respect you, and yeah, exactly. No, but that's no longer on the cards, so he has to deal with who he's become, and that's...
Yeah.
He does struggle with that, but then at other times you can see him behaving so recklessly and violently that you're just like, it's very hard to feel sorry for this guy.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's really a sort of small comfort on on this one, because like he really does create this entirely for himself.
And, in terms of the environment he creates, I think this is much more indirect, but one of the things that he may have inadvertently created is Alexander the Great.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing this thing where it's like, oh, it's all Dionysius of Syracuse. It all comes back to this one guy. Cities in Croatia, sack of Rome. It's all him.
I've got 70 episodes of that, just so you know, of people saying everything is this guy.
One of Alexander's great instruments in his victories against the Persians was the pike phalanx. The pike phalanx was the result of Philip of Macedon's great reform of the Macedonian infantry levy. That infantry levy needed to be reformed because of a Macedonian defeat against the Illyrians. The Illyrians defeated the Macedonians because they had recently reformed their army to become more heavy infantry based, which is why the reform of the Macedonian infantry went the way it did. And that reform among the Illyrians was because they'd become allies of Dionysius of Syracuse, and he had sent them a bunch of Greek armor to try it out. So,
okay.
Alexander the Great's victories over the Persians, Dionysius of Syracuse. It's all his fault. Stand by it. I stand by it. No, this is obviously an oversimplification, but he has a role to play in way more than you think, just because he is so powerful and so influential, and because he seeks conflicts to be part of, right? Yeah. He seeks moments to be like, okay, I am going to be involved in this, because then he gets pulled out. He has to march out with his army, he has to gather his mercenaries, he gets to replenish his stocks of weapons and loyal followers, etc. And he needs that in order to establish and maintain his power. So he's constantly looking for a fight. He declares war on the Carthaginians about 4 times. It really doesn't always go well, but he keeps trying again, not because the Carthaginians are stirring and are as big a threat as they were when he came to power, but rather because he needs that enemy. He needs them to be a threat so that everybody will turn to him and say, save us from the Carthaginians. And so he constantly provokes them, as well as everybody else around him, to come and bring it, essentially. So that he can be the hero, he can be the victorious general, he can destroy another city or a community and bring the spoils back home.
He's not someone who is sort of at the right place at the right time. He's someone who's ensuring that everywhere he is the right place and the right time, because he has manipulated all of the circumstances around said place and time in order to ensure that he's at the center.
Exactly. And that ripples outward into Italy, into the Adriatic, into the Balkans, into Greece. I mean, it ripples outward in every direction. We would dearly love to know more about his effect on Carthage. Like, it would absolutely be wonderful to know what the Carthaginians thought about the fact that they keep having to deal with this guy constantly, provoking war with them and forcing them to commit massive resources to the defense of their communities, which are also settled communities in Sicily and Sardinia, because it's massively destabilizing for them. And they keep sort of, having to lose vast amounts of money and expending huge numbers of lives trying to assert their position in Western Sicily and Northern Sicily. If only we knew more about how they felt about Dionysius of Syracuse, but you can see that the effect he's had on them must have also been really quite severe.
If any ancient Carthaginians are listening to this, can you please write in about your experiences of being persecuted by this man?
Generations of ancient historians will thank you, yeah.
If you could just give us a call, that would be great. Go to our website and get the contact form. So how does all of this end for him? How does he die so he can tie up?
Yeah, so there's different story. I mean, in Diodorus, he just sort of croaks, right? He just falls over. But the other account, he's in the middle of another war with Carthage that he provoked, and he just sort of dies.
When is he not?
Fine. He passes the power on to his son, or his son rather manages to take over power as Dionysius II, although he's only in power for about 12 years, and then everything in Sicily
He does bad at that.
Explodes.
Yeah.
This is a traditional story, so we're very hesitant with those very often because it's almost inevitable in every single tyranny in the Greek world. The first one is the good one, the stable one, the powerful one, the one that brings glory and spoils. The second one, bad, lawless, debauched, ineffective, weak. It's a trope. And so we're very, very hesitant to accept these kinds of stories. He was in power for 12 years. He can't have been that incompetent.
Yeah.
Right? He managed to establish himself, get the support of the army, all this kind of thing. But whatever, his son is not as successful as him. That is beyond doubt. But his death, I mean, this is something that just happens in the historical narrative. But the other tradition is that it is because Dionysius has a number of other pursuits. He's got hobbies. He's a man with hobbies. He doesn't just...
Beyond starting wars and killing his lovers. He
was apparently a poet. I won't say an accomplished poet because he was apparently terrible, but he was constantly trying to get people to come, patronizing other poets to come to his court and help him, establish himself as a poet. They were helping him try and get better. He never did. He was terrible. But of course, because he was a powerful tyrant, they weren't able to necessarily say to him that he was terrible and give him an honest review. That would make him maybe stop doing this. The famous story that I think is magnificent is that one of these poets, whose name escapes me now, basically was at this court and at a big drinking party. Dionysius recited some of his poetry and asked him, so what do you think? And he gave him an honest answer. And so Dionysius ordered him to be taken to the quarries. And the next day, all the friends of this poet came to Dionysius and said, "Oh, can you please? That's too harsh." I mean, he's just trying to be a good friend. He's telling you honestly, you shouldn't punish him for that. Just please bring him back. Give him one more chance. It's all good. Brings him back from the quarries, gets him to banquet again the next night. Dionysius recites some more of his poetry and asks the same poet, "So, what do you think?" To which the poet beckons over the servants and say, "Take me back to the quarries."
Yeah, I read this and was hoping we would get to talk about this.
Which, to his credit, Dionysius at that point was like, lol, good one, and let him be. But this is the idea. He's a terrible poet, but he keeps trying. And so he keeps having his poetry recited at the Olympic Games, which is one of the great platforms where you can speak to a lot of Greeks all at once. He's very involved in those anyway. He likes to send dedications, things like that. He also sends plays to Athens to be put on, to be staged at their great festivals, the Lenaea and the Dionysia, where they stage plays. So he has a play that's put on there and he wins. And everybody kind of realizes that he probably didn't win on the merits, but whatever, he wins the contest. The Athenians, who happen to be trying to get into an alliance with him at the time, let him win. They have reason to be nice to Dionysius. And so supposedly he's so elated with the news that he drinks too much and essentially gets alcohol poisoning and dies.
I mean, do you think that that's actually what happened? Or do you feel like that's also sort of a parable about excess?
It's a typical thing with tyrants, right? Tyrants always die from excess, right? There's one sense in which they always die from, poetic justice, which is also true in his case. There was supposedly an oracle that said that he would die after he had beaten his betters. And he was always thinking that this was going to be something to do with his wars against the Carthaginians, who were more powerful than him, but he was defeating them anyway. So he was always kind of trying, supposedly he was hesitant in his wars against the Carthaginians because he didn't want to beat his betters. Mm-hmm. But in actual fact, he beat the Athenians at the game of writing plays, right? That's beating his betters. And so then he died. So this is obviously very sort of coated in these sort of folk themes. The other thing is, of course, that tyrants are always excessive. They always want too much. They want too much drink and too much food and too much sex and too much wealth and too much power and too much land and everything in excess. And this is, goes against one of the fundamental pillars of Greek morality, which is nothing in excess, right? This is one of the great mottos of the Sanctuary at Delphi. Nothing in excess is one of the endlessly repeated mantras of Greek morality, everything in moderation. This goes right back to the Iliad. I mean, it's in the Odyssey repeatedly, everything in moderation, everything in moderation. They repeat it all the time. Moderation is best. Mm-hmm. Tyrants are the opposite of that. Tyrants are always the poster child of excess. culture of indulgence and luxury and extravagance. And so the fact that he drinks himself to death is almost too nice, right? Like that's too perfect for a tyrant.
Yeah.
So we always have to suspect that. But on the other hand, I mean, he must have by that time been well into his 70s, if I'm calculating right. No, 60s. So he's in his mid 60s at this point. Perfectly possible that as an older man who had, spent most of his life at war and in danger and under stress, that he was not able to cope with the elation of victory and overdid it. It's quite possible.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the story is a little bit too neat for us to just trust it, take it at face value.
I mean, it is also funny to imagine that he wins at sort of a theater contest. And that's why he dies. He's like a little bit of he's kind of a theater kid.
You're always just like, oh, you won. Is that really all you wanted to achieve? Yeah.
I mean, it's also funny, like, to be like, well, part of my paranoia is that nobody ever tells me the truth and I can't trust anything. And then when someone does, I send them to the quarry.
Oh, yeah.
Immediately, where you're like, you don't actually want that anyways. You just want to say that you're experiencing this.
This is the problem that the Greeks, in all of these traditions, they grapple with this contradiction, right? The point of the whole idea of a tyranny, everybody wants power except the people who have it. Everybody thinks that the tyrant is the happiest man alive except for the tyrant. Everybody thinks that it's best to be powerful and wealthy in infinite measure, but actually these people are miserable, they can't trust anyone, and they drink themselves to death. And that contradiction is something that really exercises Greek political thought. Like, is it actually, why do we want this? What is good about being a tyrant, right? But the answer is, of course, that those stories themselves are almost like a morality tale, right? Like, oh, if you get infinite power, actually, you'll come to a bad end. Poetic justice will come for you. Eventually, you will suffer the consequences for your actions. But in reality, of course, Dionysius had done really, really well for himself. He had created a very stable position of power, and he was, by all accounts, not that poster child of excess that his son was to become, right? He wasn't somebody who gave in to, like Alexander the Great or Philip, to lavish parties and excessive drinking, or, to having an endless array of lovers like, Demetrius the Besieger, or having all this sort of transgressive behavior associated with him. Not really. I mean, he was violent. He was paranoid. He was definitely somebody who couldn't sit still and enjoy what he had. But he was somebody who wasn't necessarily, doing it wrong, in the sense of like he managed to keep his tyranny going for a really long time. And to some extent, you could say that him dying at the age of 60 something from drinking too much after he finally won a poetic contest is maybe what he wanted. Who knows? Like that may have been the best possible death for Dionysius of Syracuse. He achieved everything he ever wanted in his life. So you can always see this in different ways and say, okay, maybe he was actually the one who did it exactly as the tyrant should play it. I'm not saying that that's good for anyone except him, but it seems like he was, immensely successful to the point where he became, understandably, the tyrant to later tradition.
I will also add that the paranoia seems to have been relatively efficient, because he actually is not, in fact, killed by anybody.
Right? Which, can't be said for many of his rivals, many of his successors, I should say.
Yeah, straight up. He is paranoid for 38 years and dies after drinking, potentially. So
yeah. As far as we know of his own...
He succeeded in preventing people from killing.
Yeah, exactly. So, be maximally paranoid is the is the lesson here, I guess.
What a great lesson for everyone to leave the show with.
Oh, no. No, actually, I wanted, because this show is about hating, I really wanted to say what Dionysius of, or Diodorus of Sicily, rather, how he introduces the story, the book that is most about Dionysius of Syracuse of any of the pieces of his work, right? He introduces each of the books, each of the sort of chapters, essentially, that his work is divided up in. He introduces each of those with a little sort of vignette that says, okay, well, that's what this part is about. This part of history is about this, right? This part of history is about this particular theme. You have to bear that in mind when you read it.
Not big on subtext.
Right. Not I know some people who use subtext and they're all cowards, right? This is essentially him saying, this is what this is about. When he comes to the early 4th century and what we call the early 4th century BCE, and his narrative of Dionysius's reign, like the height of his power, he introduces it with these words. He says, let no man who has gained some kind of preeminence cherish the hope that if he commits great crimes, he will for all time escape notice and go uncensured. For even if during his own lifetime he eludes the sentence of rebuke, let him expect that at a later time truth will find him out, frankly proclaiming abroad matters long hidden from mention. And this is very much, I feel, what this guy Sucked is doing for Dionysius of Syracuse.
It only took 2,000 years or whatever, but we got there. It eventually was coming for him.
Justice is served.
Something like that. This is a great place, I think, for us to end the episode. Thank you so much for coming on. I will admit I had no idea who this was when you said nobody's going to know who this guy is. And now I feel smarter, ? For knowing about him.
More bitter.
Well, sure. Definitely embittered. And it also goes to my thesis. So this new book that I'm working on like great man history. Part of it is that like every guy, I say like, okay, I'm going to go back to this one. And then I'm like, fuck, he was emulating this one. Fuck, he was emulating this one. Like every time I think, okay, we're going to start here. Okay, we should go back further. Okay, we should go back further. And it's like making me insane, basically, because every time I think there's always someone before him who did the same thing or who they were trying to be like or who they influenced or whatever.
It's Cyrus the Great. It ends with Cyrus the Great, I'm afraid.
Oh, well, great news. You've solved the problem. And there was no one before him. Thank you. Thank you so much for this. Where can people find you? Again, not physically. But...
I'm always around on Blue Sky, on Reddit Ask Historians as well. I'm there as Iphicrates is my username. And of course, people can find me if they want to use more official channels. My email is easily Googleable. So please do reach out if you have any questions about weird Sicilian tyrants.
If you have an idea, one, again, if you're an ancient Carthaginian, please, we want to hear from you. Two, if you have an idea of how the bedroom ditch might work, we're all ears. We would love to know.
I'm going to do some experimentation on this.
It will help us to be, as we've described, maximally paranoid, and that's how we will stay alive.
We keep ourselves well entrenched, literally and figuratively.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of This Guy Sucked, a member of the Multitude Podcast Collective. This episode was hosted by me, Dr. Claire Aubin, featuring special guest Dr. Roel Konijnendijk, and edited by Tyrant of Long Island, Julia Schaffini. All of our theme music was written and produced by Archon of California, Marshall Dean Williams. If you'd like to support the show and get access to all episodes, including 2 extra episodes per month, and access to our full archive of episodes, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts or to our Patreon at patreon.com/thisguysucked. You can also support TGS by giving us a 5-star rating or a review wherever you're listening to the show, so the app you're in right this very moment, or just telling a friend or two to check the show out. That would make me really happy. And I guess making me happy might make you happy. I don't know. Don't overthink it. See you next week.